Hey, thanks for joining me. I want to talk a bit about films, cinema, and how we determine what is a good film, what is a bad film, and why I believe it ultimately comes down to opinion, why it's really is subjective. And one thing I've never understood is why so much credence is given to film critics, professional film critics, um, as if they're sort of their opinion is should be the determining factor in whether individuals think a film is good or not. Now, I accept that there are scholars of film history, people who know about the film industry, people who know about camera techniques and that sort of thing. But I think cinema has always been popular culture. Okay, Hollywood is one of the most dominant forces in cinema. In India, Bollywood, but they're both popular. You know that they're pitched to mainstream appeal. You get art house films, independent films, of course, but the power that they have is obviously much less. So I think it's a fair statement to make that cinema has always been dominated by a pitch towards popular culture, popular appeal. Therefore, ultimately, it does come down to what people want, personal taste, right? It's a bit like food. Why do fast food um, restaurants do so well? You know, why are they so successful? Why is McDonald's so successful? Because it tastes good. It may not be the healthiest food in the world, but it tastes good and it's cheap, right? So a successful film, if a film is commercially successful, the chances are it's because it has had some sort of mass appeal. Now, everyone has their own opinion, and I don't think there is any such thing as the greatest film. It's a bit like you can't say someone is the most beautiful woman in the world because ultimately it comes down to opinion. Um, I've seen I've seen ladies who I find incredibly stunning, stunningly attractive, stunningly beautiful, but I know that whilst I may consider her to be, one of the most beautiful women in the world, you can't put that as a standard, as an absolute, like that is the case. Because whilst most people would probably agree, other people might have a slightly different idea. Just like food, what constitutes food. The point I'm driving at is anything to do with aesthetic appeal or taste is ultimately down to personal opinion. Films, music, what constitutes music taste, what constitutes what is popular, food, beauty, sexual appeal, those sort of things. I mean, conversely, I've heard of celebrities described as incredibly attractive, and I thought, well, yeah, they've got something, but I wouldn't go crazy about them. I've seen women who are more what I would consider natural beauty, I guess, um, and it isn't necessarily the universal standard. Not that there is such a thing, but let's say a popular standard as such. Um, so focusing on the film side of things, there's films that are really lauded by critics and are often ranked among the greatest films ever made. And I've seen them and I thought, well, that was good, but it's not that good. It's not, I wouldn't go out of my way to buy this film. I wouldn't, you know, um, and I'll give an example Vertigo, Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Now, I know with the nature of this video, I run into the risk of debates, but that's not the point. The point is what I'm driving at is personal opinion. I'm not going to argue with anyone about the merit of a film like Vertigo. I'm sure it's a very smart film, but for me, it's a little too smart for its own good. I mean, to be honest, I've only seen it once and the plot went over my head. I found it too complex. Now, maybe I wasn't paying attention. Maybe I need to watch it again. But does that film stand out for me in the way that Titanic does? No, it doesn't. It just doesn't. Titanic's my favorite film, and This is another good example. Titanic was very successful commercially. It was an epic, it was a blockbuster, but paradoxically, that's almost become its Achilles heel because I think in the last, definitely the last 10 years, there's been almost a backlash against Titanic. It's almost a victim of its own success. Like people want to criticize it because it was successful commercially. Now, I happen to believe that Titanic actually deserves all the accolades. I think it had everything. I think it had romance, it had drama, it had pretty much every human emotion, it had a great cast. It's probably not DiCaprio's strongest role, but I believe he's the greatest actor of his generation, and it was his breakthrough role. So, Titanic for me is just a masterpiece. Although I admit there's personal reasons why I like the film so much. I'm from Belfast. I mean, I was born in Belfast. It's where the ship was built. And I was born on the 1st of September 1985, which is the very day that the ship was rediscovered. So my whole life I felt a connection with that ship. I just thought the film was spellbinding. I really thought it was, I wouldn't go so far as to say it was perfect. There was a few historical errors in some of the, for example, the depiction of Officer Murdoch. But as a cinematic masterpiece, I just felt it had everything. It was the definition of epic. And I feel that when people criticize Titanic, they're only doing it because it's popular, because it was a popular film. Um, that's my view. I mean, maybe they just don't like the romance side of it. Maybe they are not interested in the history side of it. But to me, something like Titanic has a far broader appeal than films that. I mean, I've heard films described as really, really great films, and they're very, very, very art house. You know, they're very smart films or they're very philosophical films. Now, I feel there's a slight smugness to that sort of film in that they try to be too clever for their own good, or they sort of have contempt for popular appeal. It's almost like, and I'll give an example of this. The Best Marigold Hotel. Sorry, not wrong name. The Grand Budapest Hotel. I just couldn't see the appeal with that film. To me, it was just a bit weird. It wouldn't. I couldn't get what was appealing about it. Now maybe I'll need to watch it again. Maybe I'll see another angle to it that I might like. But it's just my opinion. I just didn't see what the big deal about that film was. Um, and it's a very strange thing. But that's why I don't think you can say. I mean, my personal opinion, Titanic's the greatest film ever made. And I've seen some films that have been given that title, Gone with the Wind, Star Wars. I've seen films that are really commercially very successful. For me, Titanic still easily tops the list, and it's not flawless. It's not an art house film, but for me, it does. It just has everything that an epic film should have. I'm really taken in by the romantic side of it. Um, Something that Star Wars I can't get into as much. It's entertaining, but I can never get the emotional connection in the same way because it's a space opera. It's just set in space. The characters are aliens. At least some of them are. It just I could never have that sentimental connection with a film like any of the Star Wars as opposed to Titanic, which was a real story. You know what happened. You know there were real lives on that ship, and you know it really was an Odyssey when it was built. So I find historic epics, I really connect with them, and it's perhaps I'm too easily impressed, but I do find myself getting very moved by historical epics because I connect to that human aspect in a way that a film like Star Wars just doesn't do for me. I see Star Wars as entertaining. It's a space drama. It's yeah, great special effects, but it's not. It wouldn't get me emotional in the way that Titanic would. Um, and for the same reason, Gangs of New York resonated with me in a very strong way. Um, I just thought there was something about that film that was superb. Um, But like I say, there's films that, I mean, Vertigo is considered by many critics to be one of the greatest films ever made. If I watch it again, no doubt I'll see different angles. I don't even think it was. It's not my favorite Hitchcock film. I mean, Hitchcock done some great films. I liked The Birds. I like Psycho. I like Rope. But you know, Rope is never going to get the same acclaim as Vertigo. And yet, I don't know. I just found sometimes simplicity or a more simple plot can be can be more appealing than something that is too complex because you're spending the whole time trying to work it out. And whilst you don't want a film to be so simple that it's dumbed down, I think a film that is too complex is also, or too strange, it's never going to have popular appeal. So that's why I feel that the Grand Budapest Hotel, like, it was just trying to be too smart for its own good, in my opinion. That's not to say that there isn't going to be some merit to be had. I don't hate it, but just I wasn't overly impressed. So really, what I've never understood is why film critics are given so much credence because they might understand, like I say, the history of film, camera techniques, and they may be able to psychoanalyze a plot or something. But in the end of the day, to overuse a cliche, but yeah, really, in the end of the day, it is their opinion. Um, Roger Ebert and Siskel, I'm never going to look at one of their reviews and say, oh, well, I'm going to watch a film based on what they say or others. Take Rotten Tomatoes, for instance, when these kind of fan aggregate reviews. To be quite honest, I never watch a film based on someone else's opinion because everyone has their own opinion. And what one person might deem to be a good film, another person might not be that impressed. Although I think it's like the world of art as well. What constitutes good art? And I might make a video on this. Um, I think you can also appreciate that a film is good at what it does without necessarily liking that film. So, for example, someone may appreciate that The Exorcist is a very disturbing, scary film, but they don't like disturbing, scary films. So they might recognize it's a good film at what it does, but they don't like it because they don't like the genre. You might recognize that, I don't know, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a great Western, but you might not be interested in the Western genre. Therefore, you're not going to go out of your way to see the film or to see it again, perhaps. So, I mean, personally, I like a lot of different genres. I'm not restricted to one genre. But it's a very interesting thing what how people reach those conclusions. For me personally, I've seen films also that, in my view, deserve a lot more credit. I spoke about Titanic, which does have a lot of commercial success, but it's been somewhat lauded. I mean, attacked recently, and I think because of its own popularity. Um, but there are also films that were either ignored or lambasted by critics, and I thought, well, it may not be the greatest film ever made, but it certainly doesn't deserve that sort of. And I'll give a few examples. Winter's Tale with Colin Farrell. I watched that recently. I thought it was quite an entertaining film. It was quite engaging. I liked it. I thought it was a good film. And it got pretty rough ride by the critics. Bobby, 2006. It's a film focusing on those who were in the Ambassador Hotel on the night that Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and it takes in all sorts of plots of. I mean, a lot of it's fictionalized, but I thought that was a very engaging film. Now, perhaps it was a little bit preachy in the way it was going about things, but it certainly, in my view, deserved a lot more recognition than it got. I mean, it was basically ignored. Very few people have even heard of it. Yet it had an all-star cast: Anthony Hopkins, Lawrence Fishburne. Just, I mean, that's only the beginning. There was a whole range of big name actors in that film. It got totally ignored. Um, what else? Rocky Five. Rocky Five is generally panned by Rocky fans. There's been a little bit of a reassessment, but even Sylvester Stallone has kind of distanced himself from the work like it was a travesty. It probably wasn't the best of the Rocky series, but in its own right, it was a pretty decent film with a decent storyline. You know, an old ex-legendary fighter, um, corruption in the sport of boxing. It had all the drama. In my view, it had a great soundtrack. Um, I thought it was a very engaging film. I really thought it was an enjoyable, engaging, dramatic sports film, Rocky Five. But you know, ask most Rocky fans, and they'll say, "Oh, it's terrible. You should never have made it." I don't agree with that. I think it definitely had something. So that's just something to think about. I mean, I would never impose my view on someone like how you must like this film. Would I get a little bit defensive if someone said Titanic was rubbish? Maybe, because I think that's I can understand someone not liking the historical genre. I can understand someone not liking the romance side of things, but I would probably argue if someone said Titanic was a terrible film. I can't understand the thinking behind that. And I think it's because it was popular. It's almost there's a backlash against it now. Um, if someone really liked an art house film, which I thought was a bit strange, or I wouldn't necessarily agree with them, but nor would I go out of my way to disagree with them. But what I would say is, I mean, what's the point of critics, professional critics? I suppose when you get a competitive environment like the Academy Awards, you need critics in order to make a judgment about how a film wins. And I don't know entirely the process that the Academy Awards look into. Sometimes I don't quite understand their decisions. I mean, in 2000, Gladiator won Best Picture. I understand that because it was a great film. Russell Crowe, with all due respect, in my view, is not the greatest actor. I think he can sometimes, I wouldn't say wooden, but I think, I mean, his vocal pitch is always the same. I don't know. I just think he's good at playing tough guys. That's it. I don't think he's an outstanding actor, in my humble opinion. But he won Best Actor. So you do wonder sometimes what exactly is going on. Natalie Portman, in my view, her role in Jackie was one of the best performances I have ever seen from an actress. She missed out on Best Actress in 2017. But you know, it's ultimately down to personal opinion. I'm never going to allow someone else to influence how whether or not I watch a film. It's not that I'm arrogant. I mean, I would listen to other opinions and maybe I would agree with them. You know, someone might say, "Oh, check out this film," and I would. But whether I deem it to be a great film or not is another matter. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.